Welcome back to another edition of Closed Mode, the Enterprise Sales Show. I am Brian Dietmeyer, and I'm really lucky at the end of the year to have Jen Haskell here today. She is the Director of Sales Enablement and Training at Nasuni. Jen, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Today's discussion is onboarding. Looking at a lot of studies that are out there year after year, better onboarding keeps coming up as a top need for sales teams and sales leaders. Why is this thing like this perennial problem? What are the top 2 to 3 reasons you think onboarding doesn't appear to be working?
Well, I mean, to narrow it down to 2 or 3 reasons, like I can definitely do that, but there's a whole lot of reasons why, onboarding falls short a lot. I think the first one is I look at onboarding and it happens in 3 phases at every company, whether they acknowledge it and they're prepared for it or not. There's the onboarding that's more of the corporate onboarding for all employees that HR does.
Okay.
If you're lucky and you're in a sales organization and you have a dedicated sales or technical function, then there's the onboarding that comes from that side of enablement.
Okay.
And then, of course, there should be the enablement that managers are doing, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And I think a lot of companies fall short on making sure that those 3 areas of the company are creating an onboarding for their new hires that is seamless. Most of the time it ends up seeming like they're siloed, and then they end up conflicting with each other for time and attention from that new hire.
Yeah.
I guess probably specifically for sales, there's this thought process that the faster and quicker you can get all that information out there, the faster and quicker that new hire is going to become productive. That to me is the number one miss when it comes to sales onboarding, because they're already drinking from the fire hose and now you're making it worse. As human beings, right? As human beings, we can only retain so much information in a period of time.
Yeah. And it's funny because you just took the words out of my brain that it's like, wait, the fire hose method doesn't work. But in prepping for this interview, I know a little bit about onboarding, and I was doing some snooping around, and that's a really common theme. And it's just like, boom, let's hammer people. So I'm also a big fan of kind of root cause analysis. And in prepping for this, I started thinking about if we're onboarding the wrong people, the greatest onboard program in the world isn't going to help. Do you think that's an issue with onboarding, like as a root cause, that maybe we're not getting the right people, or is the problem more onboarding itself?
It kind of depends, right? You and I were talking about that startup mentality a few minutes ago before we kicked off the podcast. The number one mistake I see with onboarding in startups is that we're hiring people based on the salary that we have to work with. And sometimes they're more junior level, but they're expected to do the same thing and perform in the same way that a veteran in sales would be able to perform. So I definitely think, like, if I looked at the lead quality side, I would look at that from 2 points of view. With the new hires, you want to attract the lead talent, that quality talent, right? Because with them comes, and this is like an antiquated term, but with them comes this Rolodex of relationships that they already have and conversations that they can already start to have with people that they've sold to in the past. On top of that, lead quality, if you can get the right folks in, 1, they will become productive quicker. 2, word of mouth, they're going to bring you more talent to the organization.
Yeah, it's two things. 1, I haven't seen much about when we talk about onboarding to look at those leading indicators, those root cause. Are we hiring the right people? Are we giving them the right leads? And I feel like this should be a more holistic, if we're going to do an analysis about why is it taking so long to get people up and running. But I want to go back to your Rolodex comment. We may have to, I love that you used it. And I bet there are people who don't know what that is, especially some of these hires. One of my partners, before a company meeting we had a few months ago, went into I don't know, Best Buy or something, and asked one of the sales reps where their flip charts were. Had no idea what a flip chart was, right? And I think it was an Office Depot. So I was like, wow, has it really changed? Did COVID change that much that people don't even know what a flip chart is? So anyway.
I mean, think about in the next, what is it? Oh my gosh, it's almost 2024. And I think 6 years ago, I did this keynote at a sales enablement society event, and I talked about the future of leadership. And I remember making a statement that said by 2025, like half the Fortune 500 companies were going to be run by millennials.
Yes.
We're there, right? And when
Yes.
we think of millennials, and I love millennials have been one of my favorite groups to onboard. They're like sponges,
Yeah.
but they've also had technology since day one. So when you say things like Rolodex, to them, that's their connections on LinkedIn Sales Navigator, right? When you say flip charts, to them, that's OneNote. You
Yeah.
know, I've had people like deliver training to them before, and they're like, oh, so and so wasn't paying attention. They were on their laptop the whole time. And I'm like, did you ask them if they were emailing? Or did you actually ask them if they were taking notes? Because I guarantee they were taking
Right.
notes.
Yeah. That's cool. That makes me think that, again, back to that, really thinking holistically, like, are we hiring the right people? Are we giving them the right leads? And is our onboarding in alignment with with this sort of class or group of people, like the way they learn, the way they think? I think those are all, and if anyone's looking at their onboarding, I think those are good sort of root cause analysis to look at. So I just read average time to revenue for a new rep is 381 days, or another way I heard it expressed is it's 1.5 sales cycles, which is really scary if you've got an 11-month sales cycle, and that's to get to the production of a tenured rep. So either a year or 1.5 sales cycles. Does that sound right? And does that sound acceptable to you?
No, it doesn't sound right, and it's not acceptable.
Yeah.
Do I think it happens? It absolutely
Yep.
happens. There are going to be some instances where it makes sense. You know, if we're talking about a really complex industry and enterprise sale. Okay, I get that. But for reps in general, we break them down. I break them down specifically at Nasuni into two categories. My non tenured reps are 9 months and under. My tenured reps are over that 9 month mark. And my goal every quarter, I need reps to close at least 2 deals as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
So I have reps that are closing deals within their first 6 months at the company.
Yes.
My goal is to consistently cut that down. And to go back to what we were talking about before, as far as, better onboarding, I think one thing that companies need to be better about, and this is a huge area of focus for me in 2024, is individual development plans.
Okay.
So you have onboarding that everyone goes through, and you kind of talked about this. Then you have very specific onboarding that's built out for your different roles and your different styles of learning. And now you're looking at quantifiable metrics, and you're even looking at your tenured reps, your veterans, if you will, and you're creating better development plans for them because they can always be better at what they do.
Yeah, so I wonder that does lead to the next question. So one of the reasons you and I decided to talk about onboarding today is because you said, "Hey, I'm like you're proud of this. Like you feel like you do a great job at it." So we've talked a little bit about kind of root cause analysis and maybe why doesn't some of it work. But let's switch to the more fun topic, which is what does work? What have you done? And I think maybe that's just one thing. Is like we have the here's for everyone, and then here's the individual plans. What else are you doing in onboarding that you think has made a difference?
We're doing pre-learning. So we have stuff that goes out to our new hires the moment they accept their offer. Most of it is public facing because we can't get them on certain systems that we have in-house, but we're at least setting the tone while we're also welcoming them to the team and,
Yeah.
and showing them what our culture is about. That moves the needle a little bit because they start to have more connection points on day one. To me, the most critical thing is the 30, 60, 90-day plan. And it's laying out for them, hey, your first 30 days, this is what you have to do. And if you could do that week over week,
Yeah.
that helps. But for me, it's more of a guideline. But I don't just tell them what they have to do. I tell them why they're doing it. So there's always measurements of success in place. If you're an SDR, you're, kind of a junior seller, you know that by day X, you should be able to pick up a phone and make a phone call to a prospect. If you're one of our more tenured sellers that has years of experience coming into our company, then by your fourth week, you should be able to join a sales call and at least deliver several of the slides in our intro deck.
Yeah.
So I think those measurements of success, tell them why they're prioritizing certain things at certain times in their journey.
Yeah, you mentioned something with the 2024 barking dogs. We're used to this on nationally syndicated news shows. So another thing that struck me in preparing for this is that a problem with a lot of onboarding programs is event focused. Like, boom, it's the fire hose up front versus this ongoing drip, drip, drip and coaching. How do you feel about that?
Well, I think, again, I try to avoid the drinking from the fire hose. And so when you just said event focus, for me, the event focus and probably what is so important is having them learn things in a way that makes sense
Yeah,
when they're actually doing something.
yeah,
So I never do a Salesforce training. I never do a CRM training during onboarding. I might give them the high level.
yeah,
Here's your team. Here's some very high level 10,000 foot view process. But mostly, I'm telling them when the time comes and you have to do these things in that system, we're going to work with you. You have a dedicated coach. You're going to go through the process with them. And I think that is what allows them to retain that information because now it's more personal. It's an opportunity that they're actually working on. We do that with their intro decks. The first couple of calls that they have with customers, they have a dedicated enablement team and coach that's helping them create their decks, helping them create their pre-call planners, working with them to use the ROI calculator that we have in place to build that business case. So we focus on being much more prescriptive and much more hands-on.
yeah. I was having a discussion with Alyssa, a friend of mine who runs global enablement for Checkpoint, and she talked a lot about context based stuff. Just we were
Yes.
talking about learning in general, but that's what just struck me about what you just said. That kind of support is that's in context. It's this call, it's this deck, it's this conversation.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah. And, you know, people that join Nasuni, I tend to get pretty positive feedback about our enablement function. They're blown away at the fact that we're not just cranking out content for you, right? We're not scheduling all hands and delivering sessions and introducing you to subject matter experts. We're in the weeds with you. We're your dedicated coaches. And we're coaching you through that process even into your more tenured months, right? So we're still doing that same thing with the rest of our sellers.
yeah. It's interesting.
Sorry, he's actually downstairs. It's my dog. He's downstairs. The garbage man came. Horrible
How
timing.
dare the garbage man come?
I mean, usually they come in the morning, so it's a bit ridiculous, but the husband just kidnapped the dog. So,
Thank you, husband.
yes. Yeah. Yeah. Let me just make sure he's taking him out. Hold on.
I wasn't kidding. No, yeah, Dan, I'm with you. Yeah. Well, no, and well, I did actually. You may not.
Yeah, Brian did call out the
Oh
fact
yeah,
that we had a dog in the house.
I think people are used to it. Yeah, it sounds like we're all
He
right.
is officially kicked out, so he should not be a problem. And my husband has his own podcast, so he should know how to help me through this
Yeah,
situation. I know. I know. I always tell
yeah, yeah, yes, sir. So, Jen, obviously, to me, one of the biggest reasons for successful onboarding or quick onboarding is time to revenue, right? So, we're making these investments. We need to make that money back. I just read a stat that somewhere around 40% of why people leave jobs is because they haven't been onboarded properly and then they can't be successful. That is that are you hearing similar? Do you see that? What's your experience with people leaving because this hasn't been done properly?
yeah, I'm surprised it's 40%. I would actually think that maybe it was more than 40%. And I think what happens is you're a seller. What do you want to do in sales? You want to close deals and you want to make money. And when you're not able to do that within the first 6 months or so, you start to get a little nervous and you start to wonder if you made the right choice. So I definitely see that happening. And to me, I always try to tell my sellers, like, my job is to make sure that you're making money as quickly as possible. I think what a lot of companies focus on more is your job is to make money for the company. No, I want my sellers to know I need them making money. I want them to pay that, first semester of tuition for their kid that just went off to college. I want them to take their family on vacation, and I'm
Yeah.
heavily invested in that.
Yeah. That's I'm going to go back to this. It really struck me about this sort of in context, just in time, one to one support. The thing that strikes me, and I'm wondering for other people listening who maybe haven't done that, is there a trick to scaling that? Because that to me is the ideal. Well, I loved your notion of the sort of 30, 60, 90. Let's take it out over time and give them, at the right moment. And then this notion of one-on-one in context is cool. Yeah, but how do you do that?
Well, one way that we do it is we have technology that allows us to take a look at the conversations that our reps are having with customers. So, the first thing I did when I joined Nasuni, and one of the reasons they brought me in, was to choose a call recording software. And, it's not Big Brother is watching. We don't want to hit our culture in the sense that they think we're always looking for them to do things that are wrong. Instead, we empower our sellers and we say, hey, tell us about the calls that you had this week and share with us the moments that you thought went really well, but share with us the moments that you're not quite sure if you nailed it. And what they're doing there is now they're enrolling us as the coach
Yeah.
into helping them. And that's been a game changer because I know every single conversation that my new hires are having, and I can follow up with them and be more prescriptive on what I think they could tweak or change in the upcoming conversations. Then we also work with their managers if we're kind of seeing like, oh, so and so has a lot of fluffer words and they kind of take away from the conversation. It's distracting. We don't feel like they really have a grasp of the value messaging. Again, we go back and we have a prescriptive plan of how we're going to turn that around.
Excellent. So something that you and I are both have interest in is EQ, and we discussed this in our last conversation, and I'm wondering, either in general for me, EQ for people who aren't familiar with it is the ability to read a room, right? And that's for me
Yep.
when I see people with low EQ, it's like you're just spewing out whatever, and you didn't hear, you don't know how to react to that. Is that teachable? Should that be part of onboarding, especially for sales reps?
I don't know that it should be part of onboarding. What I do think it should be part of, and I've just been having this conversation with my HR team, I actually do believe in things like predictive index or personality and behavior assessments. I think that does help you find people that have higher levels of EQ.
Yeah,
That emotional intelligence is something that I can make people aware of it, and I can give them tips and tricks, but at the end of the day, you either have EQ or you don't. What I can do is I can hone it. You know, Flip side of that, though, I do have to teach managers how to have high levels of EQ.
yes.
They typically have it, but they need to be better at tapping into it, especially in sales. Most of my sales managers have become people managers because they were very effective at selling, not necessarily effective at managing people because it's their first time.
Yeah.
So, in that sense, if I'm onboarding a new manager, then yes, EQ is part of the conversation. If it's a seller, EQ is something that I'll sprinkle later on in their tenure with the company.
It's here's so much this idea that great salespeople are moved into sales leadership roles, and I was
Yeah.
fortunate enough many years ago to work for Bill Marriott of Marriott Hotels, who's just an idol of mine. And Bill Marriott used to say the very same things that lead to your success will lead to your failure. And I think about
True.
that, right? Because as a rep, your job is to be the hero, and then as a manager, your job now is to build heroes. So sorry that came to mind, that that's such an issue, is that transition, which could be tied to EQ. So back to the EQ question. So
Yes.
I, excuse me. I love the fact that you've worked it in for managers and to a degree salespeople. Where I'm trying to think of resources, books, classes. Is there somewhere to lean on other than our own understanding of EQ? What would someone who wants to have that be part of their onboarding do, where would they go?
Yeah, there's some great resources out there. I'll tell you that we actually have brought in, well, several companies I've been at. I've used this individual. Keith Rosen is out of New York, and he does this really wonderful leadership training
Okay.
for coaching your sellers into more effective coaches, sales coaches. And he talks a lot about empowering your direct reports by enrolling them in conversations. So rather than showing up and saying, "Hey, I've got feedback for you," and then just giving them the feedback, you should be using a completely different approach. It should be like, "Hey, I've observed some things and I have some suggestions where I think we could get you over the hump, or I think we could get your ASPs up, or I think we could help you have even more effective conversations. Are you willing to have that conversation, and what time works best for you?" Those are the emotional intelligence things that will go a long way, because now what you've done is you've given that seller the option to say, "Yes, I'm ready to have a conversation," or, "Let me think about that. Maybe we could do it during our next one on one." You've completely broken down that initial wall of defensibility that most people have when you catch them off guard. And then there are some other great resources out there. There's a lot of books. I think about going through my undergrad, and so this book is probably 30 years old, but the leadership guide, it's
Mhm.
still relevant. If you go through that college textbook, there's a lot of good call outs to self-awareness, situational management. And then the 1 Minute Manager, I don't know if you ever
Of
read that,
course.
but
Yeah.
such an easy read, but so full of nuggets that remind you, find the moments that people are doing things right more than you find the moments where somebody is missing the boat.
Yeah, I love situational awareness. That's an easier way to describe EQ. I think I call it reading the
Yes.
room, but yeah, it's
Yeah.
like it's
But it is, right? Reading the room is really a subcomponent of
correct,
that.
correct.
And how do you be in sales, and how do you be successful in sales if you can't read the room? Reading the room is what allows you to make those pivots and to call those audibles that you sometimes need to call,
Yeah,
which is much more difficult nowadays when we're not necessarily in person in a conference room every conversation we're having.
yeah, and not likely to ever come back the way it was.
Probably not, right? I mean, the trend was this was going to happen anyways. It was going to happen a little later, around 2027, and everything sort of got fast tracked because of the
Yeah.
pandemic, but this was always going to happen. And so now we just need to hold ourselves accountable for making the best of the situation and being just as effective virtually as we are in person.
So I'm thinking back to kind of summarize a few of the things we talked about. I brought up the point about root cause. If your onboarding's not working, let's look. Are we getting the right people? Are we giving them the right leads to
Mhm.
succeed? The kind of leading indicators. And then you talked about ongoing, sort of just in time, the 30, 60, 90, rather than the fire hose up front. And I love the piece about like the individual in context. We're getting ready. We're working on an opportunity, and you're going to be coached. And you talked about leveraging technology to do that. And the other one I would add, if your onboarding's not working, is maybe look at the how current is it based on the kind of people that are coming
Yeah.
into your organization right now? Is it in alignment with millennials, or was it built in a time that no longer exists? And you just made me think about something else. Was it built in a time that was pre-COVID? And are you just building on that
Exactly.
legacy practice? Because if it's not relevant for the kind of human and the kind of environment we live in, that's going to be a problem as well.
I have a great onboarding plan. Of course, I'm biased. It's my plan. I built
Yeah,
it. But I don't ever make the assumption that it's good in 6 months, a year, 18 months. You have to consistently look at your reps' performance across the board, identify what good looks like, and who, if you had a choice, if you could like duplicate their behaviors and their patterns throughout the organization, who is that? And then how do you pull that tribal knowledge in their best practices and then transfer that? I do that consistently. And that's where I make my tweaks in my onboarding based on what I find in that exercise.
excellent. Yeah, we'll be looking forward to watch. I know one of the studies that I've been focusing on about where onboarding keeps coming up is coming out shortly, and I'm curious to see if it shows up yet again this year in terms of a top need. But I think that this is really needed. We need more conversations about it because again, it comes up too much, and I really appreciate your time chatting about this. I learned a lot prepping and in this call, so thank you.
Good. Thank you for that. And I'm sorry about the guest speaker we had, my dog Lachlan. So he's 9 months old and he's crazy.
Well, he you can't blame him. He wants to be and we should thank your husband for those who are listening who took that puppy and got that puppy out of the way for us. So thank you.
I suppose that's the downsides of recording a podcast right before the holidays. Everyone's here. But
Yeah,
but yeah, onboarding is always going to be needed. Onboarding is a critical component to getting reps to that level of performance that's expected in as shortened of a time period as possible. And when you can do it right, I wouldn't even say it's a win-win. It's a
yeah,
win-win-win, right? It's a
yeah,
win for the company. It's a win for the team that's onboarding that person. It's a win for the sales organization. And of course, it's a win for that new hire.
yeah. That part I love. It really is about fees for school, car payments. I mean, that's for the yeah. We owe it to people to help them get there if they put their trust in
We
us by
do.
coming and working for us. I think that's a great underlying reason to do this well because we clearly we need to get better at it and we need more of these discussions. So I
And
will.
sometimes you have to like flip the thought process. It's, you think of that and you're like, "Oh, well that's all well and good." Well, the other thing that I would say is look at the risk of not having a good onboarding. It's not just that you lose someone that you invested a lot of time and money to bring to the team. It's also when they do leave, the time it takes to have to go through the process again is time that you don't have someone in that seat generating revenue for your company. So, at the very least, you've got to find the right talent, you've got to cultivate that, and you've got to keep that around.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. It's I've said it a couple times. It's kind of it's a massive issue, and it's frustrating to me that it keeps coming up, and we need more best practice sharing around that to make it better. So that this is a great start. So thank you again. Yeah, for as you said, it is the end of the year. It's not. Most of us are pretty busy year end, so thank you for your time.
Oh, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.